I'm sure most people have heard the term survival of the fittest. For those who are young or perhaps unaware, this is a term associated with Charles Darwin, the founder of evolutionary theory. According to Darwin's theory of evolution, nature operates by, quote-unquote, survival of the fittest. And through the lens of evolutionary theory, we can imagine the natural world as sort of this endless competition over resources to ensure the survival of a species. Nature wants to survive, and there are obstacles to overcome. And so, through competition, nature is sharpening its sword, as it were, always seeking to become fitter and fitter, and the species that is most fit, that is to say, the most adaptable, is the species that wins the contest. Now, Darwin understood that creatures were only more or less fit when compared relatively to each other. So there really is no fittest creature due to the environmental factors at play. For example, if you took a very fit species of frog and moved it into the desert, it would hardly survive a day because it's not suited to the environment. And so the term fit, when used in evolutionary theory, refers to a creature's relative fitness within an ecosystem. In Darwin's own words, it may be said that natural selection is daily and hourly scrutinizing throughout the world, every variation, even the slightest, rejecting that which is bad, preserving and adding up all that is good, silently and insensibly working whenever and wherever opportunity offers at the improvement of each organic being in relation to its organic and inorganic conditions of life. So that was a mouthful. Let's break this down a bit. This idea of natural selection was revolutionary in the 19th century, which really wasn't that long ago. Charles Darwin published his 5th edition of The Origin of Species in 1869, at the beginning of the Second Industrial Revolution, which is when the phrase survival of the fittest became the most popular. And I think it's very interesting the kind of language used in Darwin's original account, which I just read, where he describes that natural selection is the hourly scrutinizing of every variation of species, even the slightest. Nature rejecting variations that are bad while preserving and adding up all that is good. Thus, nature works tirelessly and insensibly towards the improvement of each organic being in relation to its environment. So, folded into this concept of natural selection is this idea of progression. Nature is working to improve itself. It's scrutinizing everything, rejecting the bad, and preserving the good. And that's a big assumption to make. It would seem that within Darwin's theory, nature's goal is to refine and progress itself into some sort of quote-unquote perfect being by way of natural selection. At least, I think that's how it's commonly understood by the layperson. And that's a lovely story, and it makes some sense. And it also kind of makes me wonder what Darwin's relationship was like with his parents, and if he had maybe a parent who was very perfectionistic. Or perhaps this perfectionism was really a trait of the Victorian era society. Whether Darwin intended his theory to be seen this way or not, that's how it's most commonly understood. Today's culture perceives the natural world as presented through evolutionary theory like a sort of churning machine of perfectionism, with creatures in constant competition over resources, constantly being scrutinized for worthiness, and pitted against each other in this battle of the fittest. And this happens so that the machine of nature can continually produce better and better species, or products, through trial and error. And you will see this language used in nature documentaries all the time, where the director takes film footage and writes a script or a narration over it, which is saturated in this sort of highly competitive, rationalist ideology. Why? Why would nature do this? Well, why would nature do anything, really? But particularly, why would nature do things in such a mechanical way? And why is mankind the determiner of that? And why did this idea of survival of the fittest take such a chokehold of Western civilization? As much as we can see that there is adaptability within natural selection, and that species must change to suit their environment when needed, it would also seem like part of the story is missing. Because animals don't only reproduce, they raise their young. And trees don't just consume water and sunlight, they provide shade, habitats, and essential nutrients to other species. So, although we can see attributes of this hyper-competitive, cutthroat theory of evolution all around us, wherein animals are believed to be these mindless machines consuming resources for survival, there is plenty in nature to contradict this attitude. This idea of endless progression, competition, and constant refinement of the natural world seems like it could be a projection of capitalism. This attitude that the natural world is a heartless, mechanical, cold place, driving towards higher and higher productivity or efficiency, seems more like a reflection of our culture rather than impartial observation. So, what Darwin was really describing in his Origin of Species, in his theory of evolution, is sort of this industrialization projected onto the natural world. And this is not to say evolution doesn't occur. Of course, evolution occurs, but it is the way it has been presented, the language used, and the attitude we have taken towards the organic world because of it that I think we need to examine. As we know, the 19th century was an era of great industrialization. Mass production of goods was on the rise and seen as the epitome of progress. And of course, by trial and error, companies were always trying to outcompete each other to provide superior goods. So from a cultural anthropology perspective, industrialism was our subsistence pattern in the 19th century that defined Western culture. So when the theory of evolution came about, with its emphasis on nature's churning machine of perfectionism and radical, cutthroat, competitive production of organic animals or goods, based on a pattern of endless improvement and self-correcting processes, as we might say, survival of the fittest, that's exactly what our manufacturing industries were doing. So it all seemed very intuitive and it made sense. But let us remember, from the perspective of Vedanta, we dwell in Maya, and Maya is kind of this illusion cast over our eyes by the human ego, and Maya, in a great part, is culture. So we should always be very suspicious of anything that makes too much sense, as long as we dwell in the ego. We should always question our assumed beliefs about the nature of things, because it's very clear that industrialization influenced heavily this concept of unceasing competition within natural selection towards this endless progressive goal to improve efficiency. Today, society is still suffering under this assumption of the fierce and terrible battle that is nature, the endless competition of the cosmos, the scrutinizing and judging and preferential treatment given to the naturally fit. It's very toxic. And this is an outdated way of looking at things. And it would seem, simply by my own humble observation of nature as an amateur scholar, that there doesn't really seem to be progression towards anything. Everything in nature seems like more of a cycle. And it would seem that natural systems are at all times trying to remain in balance and sustain life rather than perfect life. And when climates change or environmental factors change, such as pollution or deforestation, living beings evolve only in short bursts and only as much as necessary so that they can once again settle into this sustainable, natural ecosystem and settle into a nice, peaceful, meditative state of balance. And a great part of balance for anyone who has spent even an hour on a hiking trail in the woods is a very deep and beautiful peace. So nature, or the organic world, really exists in this state of constant peace and meditation, with little disruptions happening here and there on all levels of life, which ultimately allows for growth, creativity, rejuvenation, and play. So animals are not always fighting each other to survive. Of course there is some competition, but there is also friendship. Animals helping each other to survive. And far greater than this endless scrutinizing and competing is the constant and continual outpouring of resources that nature provides to all creatures to ensure that life can continually be balanced and sustained. So now, in the 21st century, we have a culture that assumes everything is competitive and survival is a battle. Everything is against you, and you must overcome the whole world to prove your worthiness, your fitness to survive. And maybe to some extent, evolutionary fitness and adaptability does help us to survive. But no man is an island. We cannot survive in solitude. It's very difficult both emotionally and materially. And that's not unique to human beings. We see this all throughout the natural world. Animals and insects and even plants and fungi and trees band together to help each other to overcome challenges within natural environments. In a very basic sense, many different species raise offspring together and work to benefit the group as a whole. And these are the species who survive, not necessarily those who are individually the most fit or adapted to an environment, but those who nurture and create the strongest, healthiest, most beneficial communities. And I think this indicates sort of this hidden trait of the universe, of the cosmos, that we overlook in our current society. We love to see nature as this endless competition of survival. But what about all the help? We are always being helped. And that helping is part of the survival of the natural world. It is guaranteed to you. Consider the ferocity of winter storms, the intensity of droughts or famine or plague, the extreme differences in climates from here to there, the immense numbers of poisons and toxins and accidents that can kill you any day, or the likelihood that your heart might just stop beating at any moment, no medical reason necessary. It would seem to me that nature persists not because of waging some warlike competition that's always in motion, but rather that nature persists because all things at all times are being helped, greatly, deeply, and vastly helped by a system that is benevolent, nurturing, and protective. And so this is the helper. This is the friend. Nature, not as a competition where weak, useless, and bad creatures are always being weeded out and nullified. There are no bad creatures, and everything that exists in a natural system is put to use. Seen from an alternative evolutionary perspective, every plant, animal, insect, and life form only exists to help sustain balance within an ecosystem and benefit other life forms. We only exist to benefit one another, and this is how nature thrives. So there is a force acting in this universe which is greater than competition, and this is the helper, the nurturer, the mother, the protector, the friend. This is the mother in Mother Nature that we forget about. It is arbitrary and learned to see life through a lens of competition. That's the attitude of industrialization and capitalism. But impartial observation of the natural world, we see, in fact, there is a great benevolent system working at all times in your favor to bring you into sustainability, peace, contentment, meditation, balance, and unity with your life. We cannot exist solely to compete. And we know this is true because hormones such as adrenaline and cortisol destroy our bodies. They're only meant to be used in short bursts. So maybe 5% of nature is competition, and the rest is play, relaxation, the raising of young, the nurturing of families, and uplifting of our communities. Nature doesn't exist to constantly perfect itself. Nature exists to be in balance. The nature documentary focuses too much on the tiger killing the deer, but that only happens in a split second. And that doesn't really indicate the fitness of the deer. It could be the smartest deer in the world got lazy for a second. Everything has to die eventually. The fittest deer can be drinking water one day from a watering hole, and here comes the most ineffective and noisy tiger who just happens to be in the right place at the right time. And this is the help. So as you can see, even the fittest creatures rely upon a great amount of help for them to survive. All things must be helped, so never doubt that this great helper is working at all times in your life to create this balance and harmony, for that is the only way life is possible. And if you stare into the eyes of any creature, you will see this spirit of life gazing back at you. As strange as it is visible if you look for it. It's a light in the eyes. We look in the mirror and we don't know what we see, but this great spirit hides behind every mask and every creature. It is a playful and dynamic and curious and loving thing. It's friendly and intelligent and kind. And you can see this benevolent spirit in the face of every living thing. Indeed, it has made the face of every living thing alike, that we might know our kinship with all life. And the spirit of life, it's interconnected, you see. It is one. So that by knowing it, you might know everything else, and most importantly, yourself, as it exists outside of culture, within nature, within the cosmos. So the next time you're taking a hike and you sit down and observe the natural world seeking a glimpse of this hidden spiritual kingdom in which we dwell, what you're going to see is that a great amount of help is being given to all creatures at all times. While the physical world is always trying to decay, some great silent force is constantly healing it. Every plant and animal exists to benefit something else. That help extends from trees sheltering species in the forest to mothers feeding their young, the rare occurrences of hawks banding together to hunt, and other interspecies relationships. Animals form friendships, and of course this helps us survive. But survival isn't meant to be scary or hard or scrutinizing. Survival is fun. It's meant to be natural, and maybe there is some competition sometimes, but only in short bursts. There is also a lot of play, and a lot of love, and a lot of doing absolutely nothing. And we know this is true because human beings are animals, and we form friendships, and we thrive with a lot of play, and a lot of love, and a lot of doing absolutely nothing, just like nature intended. And I even hesitate to say our friendships are more socially complicated than other species, because if you've ever observed the dynamics of a flock of sparrows or a herd of horses on the range, you see them talking and laughing and playing in their own languages and their own ways of perceiving the natural world. A friend is a friend in nature, and we naturally know what that means. It means I will help you, and I will love you, and what benefits me benefits you, and vice versa. And in fact, some great and helpful force must be assisting us by keeping elements bonded to each other and sustaining the laws that allow the macro world to work, like gravity and time and continuity. And of course, it makes little changes to these laws all the time to benefit us without us knowing, and that's quantum probability. It always works in our favor. And this great helper assists our cells in their work of keeping the body alive. It provides us with assistance and food and opportunities. It's really very good at what it does, and nothing would exist without it. You know, we hear the most from people who are suffering. Very few people suffer in silence, nor should they. And we are noisy in our suffering because we are asking for help. And we complain the most when we have to wait for help. For certainly there are periods of waiting between being helped. But if you watch and observe the patterns in life, every person is helped eventually if they hold on long enough. And most people's lives are just a series of waiting periods between being helped. We don't really overcome obstacles so much as we are helped through them. And our lives are just a series of stumbles and pitfalls as we are ushered from one helpful person or situation into the next. So none of us are really surviving. We are just being helped. And the progression of nature into some distant goal of perfection is rather wasteful because, at least in my eyes, nature is pretty perfect, just as it is. So, from this perspective, we can see that this great helper reaches us on two different levels. One is through the cosmos, through our environment, through evolution, which is just a way of nature remaining in balance. The other way of helping is through each other. And I'll change that briefly because I will say there is a third level of helping, which is internal, and that is certainly the best help. In a spiritual sense, we can understand that the Holy Spirit resides within us, helping us to overcome internal obstacles. And at times, we are moved to help others because that spirit of life moves the world as well towards benefiting one another. From the perspective of Vedanta, we know that the Atman is called the Lord of Love. And from biblical perspective, we know that God is love. So in a modern approach, we can say the cosmos is a consciousness of transcendent love, the pure nature of the universe. All of this is love. And this great love is a helper to all things. It keeps atoms spinning and moving and dancing out of love, keeps you moving and eating and thinking out of love. And at all times, it is helping us remain in balance, in meditation, in harmony, in good health, and synchronicity with all life. And it can do that because that is the nature of love. So when we think of unity in diversity, we tend to think of diversity first. And this is because through the relative lens of the ego, natural diversity and variation is the most obvious thing. How can there be any unity in this chaotic world considering all this genetic differentiation and mutation, where no eye color and no two snowflakes are the same? And yet beneath all this multiplicity, we find something that is essentially one, something that makes all of the laws of nature work together in harmony, something that makes all of the cycles of life stay in balance. And so this is the helper. This is the friend. This is the mother, the unity, nature in orchestra, faith in symphony. The cosmos and the natural world is the eternal song of being, this beauty that exists within you and is helping you at all times by design. For ultimately, we dwell within a universe of transcendent love.